I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. First, Dr. Carol Routledge, Chief Scientific and Medical Officer at Small Pharma. Carol Routledge is a dynamic R&D professional and drug development expert with over 30 years of experience across both the UK and US-based pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, as well as the non-profit sector. Welcome, Carol. Robert Barrow, next to me, whom you've heard already this morning, CEO of MindMed, is an accomplished pharmaceutical executive and clinical pharmacologist with over a decade of experience leading drug development programs in a variety of disease areas. Mr. Barrow previously served as Director of Drug Development and Discovery at the USONA Institute, where he oversaw preclinical, clinical, and regulatory development efforts for all of USONA's development programs. Welcome, Robert. Cosmo Feilding, Mellen, CEO of Beckley Psytech, and a drug development entrepreneur, dedicated to unlocking the medical potential of psychoactive substances, and really with the view to help patients in need. And last but not least, Alejandro Antalich, the CEO of Biomind Labs, and director as well. So Alejandro was the Chief Executive Officer of ICC Labs before, which was the first publicly traded company in the world to sell cannabis to a federal government, bridging the gap between the stigma behind certain controlled substances and the regulator. Through strategic determination, commitment, responsibility, and passion, he led ICC Labs to its successful sale to Aurora Cannabis in November 2018, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. Welcome to the panelists. So we met before, and very exciting to be hosting this. As we discussed, we just wanted to have a broad overview about the kind of novel applications where psychedelics can be developed for. We've heard about the psychiatric conditions this morning largely. What other kind of conditions, novel applications in psychedelics are you excited about? And are you allowed to tell us a bit what you actually are working on within your companies? I don't know if I'll pass this round or if it's enough to have that. Cara, go ahead, start.
We are working in the mental health space, so actually our first indication is major depressive disorder. We probably will move on to the indications after that. So mental health is key for Small Pharma. In answering your question, what am I excited about? I don't know whether they'll work in neurodegeneration, but I'm really quite excited about neurodegeneration too. Before I joined Small Pharma, I worked in the dementia space and collaborated with a few professors in Scotland and England, and actually they're also really keen to understand if this treatment approach has any utility in neurodegeneration. I'm not sure it has, by the way, but I think it'd be really interesting to see.
Let's go next. I'll go next. So MindMed, we've got three main clinical assets that we're working on: LSD and anxiety disorders, an extension of the work that Dr. Lichty and his lab have been conducting. We're also working on a analog to Ibogaine called 18MC, and we're developing it for opioid withdrawal and opioid use disorder. So we see an opportunity far beyond psychiatry. We also, in our pain space, we're also looking at preliminarily LSD in chronic pain conditions, something that hasn't really been explored recently, but there's actually an extraordinary body of evidence of the analgesic effects of psychedelics. It's really quite remarkable in cancer pain and phantom limb pain, other conditions. So, and then a third, the RNA enantiomer of MDMA, we're developing in autism spectrum disorder. So we think about the opportunity to treat brain disorders, again, outside of psychiatry and pain and neurodevelopmental disorders and an addiction. I think already this morning we've heard several mentions of use disorders. LSD has a long history, probably the largest body of evidence in treating alcohol use disorder. So in terms of excitement, I'm excited to see what we do, what all of you do, what the entire field does in terms of initial definitive clinical research studies of phase 3 and late phase 2 programs that clearly establish efficacy and safety, but also it doesn't end there. There's going to be a lifetime of work to do and new indications and new molecules. So I'm excited to get over these initial hurdles and then sort of unleash the floodgates and see what comes next.
Right. And so yeah, I mean, look, I think we've all got relatively similar views, I'd say, we see it as, I suppose, the lowest hanging fruit where the most evidence is in mood disorders. Dave was describing it very well, and obviously the earlier study in anxiety. So for Beckley Psytech, the first program is looking at the short-acting drug 5-MeO-DMT, and our kind of primary target is looking at treatment-resistant depression, so starting with a mood disorder. But then, in our view, that, again, similar to what you guys are saying, the kind of second layer of evidence is around the kind of use disorders. So we're very interested to explore use disorders. And then the kind of exciting area that's less proven, but there's a lot of compelling early stage evidence around neurological conditions like pain conditions, headache conditions. And so we have a kind of small exploratory study on low dose psilocybin in this very, very rare headache condition called Sunha, which is a kind of a very rare disease that has no approved treatment. It's an incredibly debilitating condition. But it's really kind of a first exploratory study in the kind of headache neurological space. And then, like Carol, I think the kind of neurodegeneration space is a really, really exciting. I mean, if we can crack it, then that's amazing. And actually, so for those of you who don't know, my mother is speaking later, and I have the honor of interviewing her, in fact. And she runs the Beckley Foundation, a non-profit, and they're going to do some very interesting studies in neurodegenerative diseases as well.
Yes, I believe that, and I will start with last words of David. We need to change something in our brains in order to make a real change in our lives. So what Biomind Labs is bringing to the space is fresh air, because what we most talk about is psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, but in our case, we are bringing 3 molecules to our portfolio that will really make a change in the industry. We are talking about DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, and mescaline. And we are very proud to be, our scientific team, to be the first team in conducting a randomized placebo-controlled trial on a psychedelic substance, in this case, ayahuasca. It was a trial that brought a lot of information in order to keep discovering new ways to use psychedelic molecules. So that's why I believe this is something that we are adding to what other companies have been doing, and most important, what scientists have been doing during the last decades. I believe we still have too much work to do. Research and more research is needed in order to get these novel drugs approved. So this is a big challenge that we have ahead, but we are creating enough evidence in order to convince policymakers, government authorities, regulators, in order to get these novel drugs approved. We have almost 1 billion people with any kind of mental health disorder. So 1/8 of the global population. This is something that we need to start doing something right away. So when we think and when we talk about COVID, the pandemic, that's fine, but it's not the end. So we have something very big around us, and mental health disorder, I believe, is the challenge that we have to resolve as soon as possible. So that's why it's very important that regulators, government authorities, and policymakers get all the evidence, all the required evidence, in order to start approving these kind of treatments that will save millions of lives. So this is our commitment, and great to be here discussing with our peers, because we are all on the same boat.
And can I just add something else to that? So I think it also depends on the molecules, and certainly the follow-on molecules, what indication some of these treatments may go into. Because if you think of neurodegeneration, we may have to administer on a more chronic basis. So I think the follow-on molecules that various companies are bringing, I think that's also going to be really exciting. And I think this is an area where we almost started off doing clinical research and we missed the mechanistic preclinical research, not entirely. And so actually maybe going back a little bit to truly understand exactly how these molecules will work, and then maybe point us in the direction of the different indications and which one should be useful in which indication. So we've got a lot to learn. I think huge amount of potential and huge amount of promise, but we have got a lot to learn, I think, still.
And it's fascinating just the amount of research that is coming out recently, the past decade and so on. And now Carol, you've been instrumental as well in that. And I think when we speak about drug development in general, with the focus here within this group so far has been on the kind of the drug, the product itself. What about the process, the surrounding process? I know there might be different opinions within the panel here, so I'm just keen to hear people's view and whether, the product and the process varies or might vary between different products and also between different conditions to be treated. Rob, do you want to
think
start?
well, I mean, it's absolutely the case when you talk about headache disorders with psychedelics. There's certainly a mechanistic argument and a clinical argument that to treat a headache disorder at a self-hallucinogenic dose, you're not looking at a psychotherapy protocol alongside it. Certainly, I think it's a very complex and interesting question. It's one of those hard questions that gets raised by regulators, by everyone. I think we all have to answer this question of the role of therapy alongside drugs and how that interaction plays out. One of the things that I personally, and I think organizationally, how we approach is that good psychotherapy is good. Good psychotherapy improves the outcomes for SRIs to the same degree that SRIs work over a placebo. So drug plus therapy is better. We almost definitively know this. What we have yet to prove, at least with psychedelics, is whether the drugs have any activity alone or not. It's an interesting question. It's an important one to ask. Again, I think it's also important to contextualize what role each group plays in this. So we're a pharmaceutical company. We develop drugs, we develop products, get them approved. If you think of an easier to digest in some ways analog, if we're developing anesthetics, we don't tell surgeons how to do surgery. We develop the anesthetics and provide that and let the surgeons do what they need to do. And that way we interact that same way with therapists and psychotherapists. Again, we don't turn our back on it in any meaningful way. What we want to do is facilitate a way to bring these tools to patients in an environment where they can then benefit maximally, where we have the protocols, where we've done the research to align and have some semblance of connection between the two. So it isn't entirely separate, but at the same time, it does speak somewhat to the role that each organization or each party plays in this, in my mind.
And I mean, I think it's such an interesting question, basically, because obviously, I suppose the kind of peculiarity of psychedelics and where we've got to in the history of the research is that, unlike a lot of other drugs, it has been the main body of evidence is the combination of the two, and that's why, to Rob's point, kind of unpicking how those two interact and play a part is as yet kind of unproven. But the vast majority of evidence is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, which is, it is the concept is that they are synergistic. So, the psychotherapy, the preparation, obviously kind of provides the best possible mindset for the patient and the therapeutic alliance to get the most out of the experience. And then subsequently, the way the drug works, and to Dave's talk before, it creates this window of neuroplasticity, and that's where therapy can be even more effective than it would in a normal setting. That's the kind of the concept around this synergy. But to Rob's point, it's obviously also, it's the kind of most exciting thing and also the biggest challenge to the industry, because what everyone asks is, well, how are you going to commercialize it? How are you going to, and what are the regulators going to think, and how do you standardize it? So this is a kind of industry-wide challenge, but it's something that we can't kind of get away from. We all have to kind of address it in our studies as we go.
Yeah, so I agree very much with both of you, but I think it's more than breaking down the pharmaceutical and the therapy. It's also breaking down the therapy pieces as well. So even if you don't believe in the utility of the therapy, I can't imagine, doing a clinical trial where there are 7 patients in a ward and you give them all 5-methoxy-DMT or DMT or anything with nothing at all. So you're right, there's that preparation bit, and largely that preparation bit is about the care and support of the patient, and it is putting in the right frame of mind, but that's also for the care and support of the patient as well as the efficacy.
Yeah.
So, I can't see how somebody
safety,
wouldn't do that bit, even if you don't think the integration piece afterwards is massively important. We do, by the way, and we think that's important for long-term efficacy. But to do it with absolutely none at all, I just think it is foolish. I was going to say it's foolish. I don't mean it's foolish, but I just think, is it irresponsible? Is that not the way to do it? But I agree with Rob too. The ideal would be to have a study where you could compare, but you can't because I don't know how you blind it. You could compare psychedelic alone, but with that preparation bit, and then psychedelic with the wraparound, all of the wraparound therapy. But it's really hard to do that because how on this earth do you blind a study like that? So maybe we look at the results of a company who's doing major depressive disorder, which is our first indication, without therapy, and then we look at the results of small pharma who are doing it with therapy, and try and compare. And I know that's hard because everybody does their study slightly differently. I appreciate that. But it's hard to do, I think.
Yes. So the thing is, in our case, we develop novel drugs. So we are a pharma company, so we don't deal with the treatments. But I believe this work must be done improving the relationship between patient and physician. And there is where we need to work, and obviously we develop the novel drugs and we create the protocols in order to be used on the sessions. And that's why in our case we change the way we understand the assisted therapy. For us, it's more than an intervention-based model because we target fast-acting psychedelics, meaning that we are targeting sessions of just 10 to 15 minutes. So it's like going to surgery and then you are out and you are ready to talk with your physician. So, I believe, meaning that we need to target, and if we believe as a company that we need to democratize the use of these novel drugs based on psychedelic molecules, it's very important to develop affordable treatments. Because at the end, if we are talking that we have 1 billion people with any kind of mental health disorders, and we are not able to create affordable treatments, our efforts would be in vain. So that's why it's so important to create these novel drugs, get them approved, but then work closely with the psychiatry community. We need to prepare more psychiatrists in order to work on these intervention models. So this is our target, and I believe we have a huge opportunity in order to change the way psychiatry treatments are conceived right now.
But also, sorry, you go. No, you go.
One of the challenges we face is that, and this is irrespective of psychedelics, is that there aren't enough psychiatrists. There just aren't enough providers out there to provide the kind of care that patients would need to maximally benefit. Other thing, and to your point, Carol, one of the things I think, this is sort of expanding outside of just this topic, but because of the unique phenomenology of psychedelics, I think we're often tempted to think about them as something entirely sort of dichotomous in the sense of either it's put them in a room and give them a drug or a heavily involved therapy model. I would offer that I think the entire framework, we talk about placebo controls, we talked about therapy. With any drug you get, if you get an SRI, if you get Zoloft, you're taken in, you're told about the risks and what to expect and that it's going to take a while. So it's not just semantics, and I don't think it's going to be that level of low touch on the front end, but it's not novel in care delivery or in drug development to provide some level of psychosocial support, some level of Vivitrol for AD, right, is labeled to have a comprehensive management program that includes psychosocial support. That's a precedent. Doesn't stand out. When you think of psychostimulants, when you think of opioids, when you think of biologics, all of these also, when you talk about blinding issue, the concept that drugs are fully and completely blinded, not psychedelics, but any other drugs, it's one of those things you don't talk about, right? But you kind of turn a blind eye to. If you get a psychostimulant, if you get an opioid, you're getting an opioid. If you get a biologic, you get an injection site reaction. Ketamine, for instance, 80% dissociation adverse event with ketamine versus 10 or so for the placebo. Again, that's not blinded either. So these are complex problems. They're important questions to ask, but we also need to ground ourselves that they're really not that unique, even though the drug effects.
That turned you blue. There was that drug that turned you blue, didn't you? That's
well,
not
niacin, right? I mean,
yeah.
niacin, the preferred control. I mean, these studies, and as Steve Ross, they started out using 250 megs of niacin, and the problem was that it turned people beet red, and they actually was more unblinding than a placebo. So we kind of can't lose sight of the fact that the drugs are unique, the effects are fascinating, but it's not a totally new world. It still fits into some framework and some semblance of what we're used to.
Yeah, no, I agree. Can I just come back to a point you made about the therapy piece? Because it is a psychiatrist and it's patients and it's informing and educating lots of people, but it's also informing and educating regulators. And so, we received this ILAP passport, Innovation Licensing Access Pathway, and which actually has been surprisingly to me, based on who the partners are, really, really positive. So actually, it's not only convincing those people, it's convincing regulators. And as part of that ILAP process, you also have NICE sitting around the table and the Scottish Medicines Consortium and a Wales medical body, which I can't remember. And they are all on board. They all get it. They really all get that you're taking this pharmaceutical and you're taking this therapy and you're trying to do them together. So I think it's educating lots of people, but it's working because if regulators are on board now, and NICE were great, if they're on board now.
That's why we are here. We are just landing in UK because of that.
Yeah.
Because I believe regulators are changing their minds. They are more open to this kind of novel medicines.
Yeah,
so it's great. It's great what UK is doing on psychedelics, and I believe in a very few months, UK will become the center of psychedelic research, without any doubt.
It will vary by geography. Well, it varies by geography. I mean, like every regulatory construct, it varies by where you are. And I think I certainly have the closest familiarity with FDA and the U.S. environment. Despite desires, including in high up desires to see this happen, I think it needs a change, a pretty drastic legislative change if that's going to actually happen, because not legislative in terms of rescheduling drugs, but FDA by law does not regulate the delivery of medicine.